All right, so we are resuming with the third video about chapter 10, which is about banks and the credit market. So scrolling back to where we left off, which is thinking about central bank policy and investment expenditure. How are central banks related to spending in the broad economy? Well, broadly speaking, we assume that interest rates influence investment expenditure by firms. And remember that investment expenditure specifically refers to firms' willingness and ability to spend on physical capital and on households and firms' ability to purchase or lease housing. As interest rates rise, we assume that investment expenditure falls, all else equal. As interest rates fall, we assume that investment expenditure increases, all else equal. Essentially, since interest rates are the price of borrowing, and we assume that most firms borrow in order to enable their physical capital expenditure, that a rise in price leads to a reduction in the quantity of expenditure. Second set of policies relates to monetary base and expenditure. As money in circulation goes up, we expect that expenditure should increase. And there's an implicit link here with interest rates. We assume that increasing the amount of money in circulation causes interest rates to fall, which causes expenditure to rise. And the opposite should happen if money is taken out of circulation. If money in circulation falls, interest rates should rise and expenditure should fall. Credit markets, power, and informational asymmetries. Information asymmetries tend to define credit markets. And we can think about this in terms of banks' uncertainty about who they are lending to, and we can think about individuals' uncertainty or lack of access to information about banks' lending decisions in general. Credit rationing refers to the willingness, a lesser or a greater willingness to lend to different groups based on characteristics independent of income and so on. So if, say, a bank charges higher interest rates to particular groups, and there's a lot of empirical evidence that this happens, that would be an example of credit rationing. A greater willingness to lend to some relative to others is broadly what we think of as credit rationing. And credit exclusion refers to outright bans on lending in particular areas or to particular populations. So if we think back to US history and the legacy of redlining, which is the willingness of banks to lend in particular areas and to not lend in other geographic areas, often based on the population of people who lived in those areas, that would be an example of credit exclusion. Lack of access to credit in a particular area for any number of reasons all counts in here. And then finally, credit constraints refer broadly to the notion that some people may have greater access to credit, while others may have less access to credit. Credit markets and inequality. How can a credit market increase or decrease inequality? Broadly speaking, access to credit enables different types of expenditure. Access to credit enables entrepreneurship in a major way. Having it be easier to borrow enables people's ability to engage in different economic activities. And lack of access to that can inhibit the starting of businesses, the funding of opportunities, even the generation of wealth over time. So the question of whether different groups pay the same rates for credit or whether different groups have outright exclusion from credit, we assume is going to make a difference for overall economic outcomes.